For decades, the House of Gloucester quietly protected one of the Crown's most secret and sacred collections, an heirloom vault hidden entirely from public view. No one expected Prince Richard, the often overlooked royal known for his calm presence and lack of controversy, to make a decision so powerful it would bypass his own bloodline and place Charlotte on a path toward unprecedented royal authority. Long regarded as a polite figure in the background, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was in fact guarding a secret far deeper than anyone imagined. Beneath his official residences, secured by layers of reinforced protection, lay a private vault passed down through generations of lesser-known royals. This collection was not merely symbolic. It represented the monarchy's quiet strength, containing treasures never seen on public tours or mentioned by the press. Queen Mary's private coronet, handwritten letters from past monarchs, and relics from forgotten battles erased from common history books. These items were not simple heirlooms, but powerful declarations of history, influence, and control. Few knew that decades earlier, Richard had made a private pact with Queen Elizabeth II herself during a hushed late-night conversation at Balmoral. While Charles was being prepared for kingship and Edward assumed ceremonial roles, Elizabeth entrusted Richard with safeguarding these artifacts, telling him they must outlast the noise surrounding the crown. From that moment, Richard swore an oath of protection, one he carried with unwavering seriousness. Over time, Richard developed an affection that went far beyond protocol or prestige and centered instead on potential. And in Princess Charlotte, he saw what others failed to notice. During unpublicized visits to Kensington, he spent hours in quiet conversation with the young royal, testing her knowledge of Windsor history, listening carefully to her questions, and studying her instincts. While the world focused on George as the heir and dismissed Louis as the wild card, Charlotte steadily earned Richard's trust and eventually his confidence in her future role. Behind the scenes, however, tension grew. Prince Edward's family began to sense that something was amiss as invitations dwindled, interactions cooled, and whispers spread that his children were being quietly sidelined. What they did not realize was that the arrangement had already become irreversible. Richard no longer viewed them as suitable heirs to the legacy, and each unanswered letter from the Wessex household only reinforced his belief that the future demanded bold divergence rather than tradition. When rumors finally reached the inner circle that Richard intended to alter the fate of the heirlooms, disbelief turned to dread, for this was never about jewels or property, but about symbolic dominance, the transfer of ancient authority to a child outside his bloodline. As the House of Gloucester approached its final chapter, the ink was being written in Charlotte's name. While the vault preserved the relics of a fading era, it was Richard's next move that threatened to reshape the royal future. As public attention lingered on her brothers, Charlotte was being quietly groomed behind palace walls by royals with long memories and deeper loyalties. From the moment she entered royal life, she was never treated as a spare. Instead, she was shaped with purpose, absorbing lessons in diplomacy, languages, history, and constitutional nuance, as well as the subtle psychology of power. This careful preparation was not guided by William and Catherine alone, but also by Princess and Prince Richard, who saw in Charlotte not just promise but authority. Richard, in particular, became captivated by what he called her old soul, privately comparing her to Queen Elizabeth I, both daughters of turbulent dynasties, both underestimated in their youth, drawn by Charlotte's sharp observations and relentless curiosity. Charlotte's instinct to listen before she spoke, paired with her deep curiosity about history, set her apart, and these qualities did not go unnoticed. During intimate tea sessions at Kensington, Richard began sharing closely guarded family truths, quietly testing her judgment and discretion. When she turned 7, he presented her with a gift unknown outside their inner circle, a miniature replica of the Gloucester crown, modelled after a lost Tudor design. It was not a toy or a keepsake, but a symbol, a silent message to prepare. As her lessons intensified, the distance between Charlotte and her cousins widened. While James and Lady Louise were offered ceremonial exposure and limited involvement in royal affairs, Charlotte was invited into rooms where futures were shaped. By age 10, she had observed private councils, listened to debates over succession optics, and become fluent in French and Latin, a deliberate foundation for European diplomacy. In contrast, Edward's children remained increasingly excluded, acutely aware of the silence surrounding them. What appeared to be minor social oversights were, in reality, deliberate fractures drawn by those with a long-term plan, one whispered in corridors and sealed in private agreements among the monarchy's oldest guardians. This was a hidden succession, not to the throne itself, but to the legacy, valuing discretion over title and potential over proximity. Richard, Princess Anne, and even former advisors to Queen Elizabeth II were steering a shift no public poll or constitutional clause could foresee, choosing the author of history rather than waiting for it to unfold, and they had chosen Charlotte. That quiet understanding erupted into open turmoil when Richard formalized his loyalty through a handwritten decree that sent shockwaves across generations. One sealed envelope, one deliberate signature, was enough to overturn tradition. Delivered without ceremony to royal legal advisors and bearing Richard's unmistakable hand, the document had been drafted in near-total secrecy, known only to a handful of senior advisors and the resolute Duke himself. When it was finally opened, the silence that followed spoke volumes. This was no symbolic gesture or routine, but a legal transfer of extraordinary consequence. The entire Gloucester heirloom collection, jewels, scrolls, and sacred artifacts long passed through Richard's own bloodline, was to be granted to Princess Charlotte in full and permanent possession. Every word was precise, leaving no room for ambiguity. "Let it be known," Richard wrote, "that the weight of this legacy shall rest with she who mirrors the crown's future, not with those who cling to the comforts of lineage." Beneath it, a line that echoed through Buckingham Palace for weeks. "For the future of the crown, not the past of the house." The decree was both a declaration and a rejection, publicly severing Edward's branch from the legacy. Charlotte had been chosen, Edward's children had not. The reaction from Edward's household was immediate and fierce, with lawyers summoned and challenges prepared within hours, arguing the move violated the spirit of royal inheritance. Yet Richard had anticipated every objection. The document was legally airtight, reinforced by historical precedent, and annotated in earlier drafts by Queen Elizabeth II herself. She had not opposed it, she had once encouraged it. Edward's position weakened further when Richard's private notes surfaced subtly, questioning whether Edward's descendants possessed the resolve and discretion required to carry such a legacy. The fallout was immediate and chaotic. Buckingham Palace refused to issue a public statement for 72 hours, trapped between constitutional protocol and an escalating emotional crisis, as journalists swarmed and leaks poured out like a burst pipe. Headlines openly questioned whether the monarchy was fracturing from within, and public opinion quickly split, some praising Richard's bold resolve and Charlotte's apparent readiness, others condemning what they viewed as a calculated humiliation of Edward and his children. What had begun as a single sealed envelope soon erupted into a full-blown royal scandal. Yet even amid legal uncertainty and relentless media scrutiny, Richard did not waver. Through a senior aide, he offered only one comment: "Time will prove this decision wise. The past is loyal to comfort. The future demands courage." These were not the words of a man in doubt, but of someone determined to rewrite his legacy. The ink was barely dry when Prince Edward, furious and wounded, demanded answers, transforming a private family rift into a public spectacle. Behind closed doors came insults, leaked voicemails, and a rare royal shouting match that shattered decades of Windsor discretion. Edward's anger ran deeper than the loss of legacy. It was fueled by betrayal, pride, and the realization that his family had been quietly set aside. After days of media chaos and legal threats, he secured a private meeting with Richard at Windsor, an encounter steeped in secrecy and tension. What was meant to be a measured discussion over precedent quickly devolved into a clash of philosophies. Edward accused Richard of staging a coup disguised as stewardship, reportedly shouting that he had burned the bridge to his own blood by crowning a child while burying his lineage. Richard's reply was cold and unnerving in its calm. Not all blood deserves to inherit. Desperate to salvage what remained, Sophie made an emotional plea for unity, appealing to love, loyalty, and the fragile threads holding the House of Windsor together. Her voice reportedly broke as she begged Richard to reconsider, if not for Edward, then for James and Louise. But Richard did not bend. "The crown isn't built on sentiment," he told her. "It survives on foresight." As emotions spiraled, the family turned to Princess Anne, long known as the monarchy's steady hand, who invited both brothers to a quiet mediation at her Gatcombe residence. Even Anne, the iron-willed peacemaker, could not thaw the frost. Richard saw principle, Edward saw punishment, and between them stood Charlotte, the silent symbol of a new order. The feud soon spread through the wider family, drawing in figures like Zara Tyndall and Princess Eugenie, once considered neutral. Private messages leaked, old rivalries resurfaced, and even casual gestures became weapons, missed invitations, cancelled lunches, and subtle slights turning into declarations as clear lines were drawn. Neutrality quickly became impossible, and then came an unexpected blow. Queen Camilla, ever the strategist, released a cryptic remark during a charity engagement, praising families who remain united in the face of betrayal and warning against abandoning one's own children for the sake of political futures. Though no names were spoken, the message was unmistakable. Edward had found an ally, and Richard had been publicly called out by a queen, deepening the divide. Inside the palace, relationships unraveled as staff avoided eye contact. Meetings were quietly postponed, and tensions settled into every corridor. One question now haunted the institution. Had the royal family crossed a line from which there was no return? This was no longer about inheritance, but about an open wound the crown seemed powerless to heal. As the family fractured, Princess Charlotte was thrust into the spotlight, whether she wished it or not. There were no tiaras, no trumpets, no balcony appearances, yet what followed became one of the most defining coronations in modern royal memory. In the stillness of a private ceremony, Charlotte was entrusted with more than jewels. She inherited a legacy of loyalty, resilience, and quiet rebellion. Behind the thick stone walls of Clarence House, far from cameras and ceremony, a meeting took place that would redefine the Windsor lineage. There were no crowds, no official robes, no crown bearers, yet the moment carried the weight of centuries. Prince Richard stood opposite Princess Charlotte, not as a duke transferring possessions, but as a guardian passing on purpose. Between them sat an heirloom chest untouched for decades, a vault of time itself. As the lid slowly opened, Charlotte beheld a legacy that had outlived monarchs and monarchies. Queen Mary's brooch, worn yet defiant. Queen Elizabeth II's personal diary, bound in faded leather, and handwritten letters from a long-forgotten sovereign reminding her descendant that duty is often a quiet war. It was not merely the objects that mattered, but their meaning. They embodied a monarchy that had endured assassination plots, divorces, abdications, wars, and relentless public scrutiny. Richard looked at Charlotte with solemn resolve rather than affection, and in that silent exchange, a vow passed between generations. In that moment, Charlotte was no longer simply a daughter, a sister, or a princess. She was entrusted with the soul of a house and expected to guard it with fire. The image itself was almost unreadable, yet Charlotte's eyes were set with a quiet steel that spoke volumes. That photograph, hidden away for weeks, would later become iconic. Then came the vow. In a voice barely above a whisper, Charlotte spoke the words Richard had written long ago but never dared to say aloud. "I will honor the realm before the crown." The phrase echoed through the ancient chamber, not as mere symbolism, but as something revolutionary, signaling a shift from pageantry to principle and from lineage to leadership. For Richard, it brought closure. For Charlotte, it marked the true beginning of her burden. Palace aides attempted to contain the moment, enforcing a complete blackout on the event, but silence could not hold forever. Moved by what she witnessed, a junior staffer anonymously alerted a journalist, and within 48 hours a media storm erupted. Headlines proclaimed that Charlotte had received the hidden crown, and that Richard's transfer signaled a new era. Public fascination surged, Charlotte's approval ratings soared, and behind closed doors senior royals scrambled to regain control of a narrative that had already escaped them. Once known mainly for her charm, Charlotte was now spoken of as a future matriarch in waiting, praised for her poise, discretion, and rare maturity, as even former skeptics began quietly invoking her name in discussions about the monarchy's long-term image. Yet her rise was far from universally celebrated. Within the family, admiration collided with resentment, reopening wounds that had never fully healed. As Charlotte stepped forward into a life defined by duty, the past surged back through bitter whispers and long-buried secrets. Prince William said nothing, but in the monarchy, silence carries weight. His refusal to intervene was more than neutrality. It was a quiet endorsement that left Edward shaken and Camilla blindsided. From the outset, William had known. Long before the media frenzy and the heated confrontations behind palace walls, Richard had already briefed him. It was not permission Richard sought, but understanding, and William, ever the strategist, offered just enough of both. During a rare moment of candor at a private dinner in Balmoral, he spoke words that echoed through family corridors for weeks. Legacy must evolve. It was not merely an observation, but a line drawn in the sand, acceptance rather than opposition. And beside William stood Catherine, calm and deliberate, whose influence ran deeper than many realized. She had arranged those early tutoring sessions with Princess, and had encouraged Richard's mentorship, when others dismissed Charlotte as too young. Catherine recognized in her daughter a quiet strength that mirrored her own ascent, forged not in noise or entitlement, but in patience, discipline, and resolve. While William remained outwardly silent, Catherine worked from the shadows, tightening Charlotte's inner circle and preparing her for the storm she knew was inevitable. Even Prince George, the heir apparent and Charlotte's elder brother, was quietly brought into the fold. There was no rivalry between them, only respect. Having experienced the weight of destiny himself, George admired Charlotte's strength and her ability to carry responsibility with calm resolve. He did not feel threatened, he felt relieved. As one royal insider put it, they were not competing for a throne, but learning how to share the burden. That rare and unbreakable bond between the siblings only reinforced William and Catherine's position. Charlotte had earned her place not as a substitute, but as a pillar of the future monarchy. Not everyone, however, accepted that reality. Camilla watched William's silence with growing frustration, having long relied on his loyalty to preserve the delicate balance she and Charles had cultivated. As the institution began to tilt toward Charlotte, Camilla sensed her own influence slipping away. In a private remark to a trusted aide, she reportedly questioned whether William would protect tradition at all if he would not even defend his uncle. Her words were sharp, and her demeanor in family briefings grew noticeably colder. Charles, meanwhile, remained passively distant, allowing Camilla's disappointment to harden into quiet opposition. Inside the palace, staff began dividing along invisible lines. Those traditionally loyal to Charles and Camilla whispered their discontent behind closed doors, while others, emboldened by William's silent approval, aligned themselves with the emerging power structure. Meetings grew tense, decisions slowed, and allegiances blurred. A court once defined by precision started to fracture not through open chaos, but through careful, calculated rebellion. William never issued a public statement, yet his refusal to defend Edward or project unity spoke volumes. In choosing silence, he chose Charlotte, and in doing so, he created enemies he would eventually have to face. As the House of Cambridge held firm, the House of Wessex began to unravel, and Edward's children finally made their move. Long overshadowed and overlooked, James and Lady Louise launched a counteroffensive that was anything but symbolic. It was a deliberate campaign to reclaim their place in royal history. Years of simmering resentment reached a breaking point with the public revelation of Richard's heirloom transfer. What had once been hidden was now impossible to ignore, and the Wessex siblings were done remaining silent. Their response was swift, striking, and unmistakably defiant. A joint statement released not through official palace channels, but via their own newly appointed spokesperson. Without naming Charlotte directly, it openly questioned the precedent, propriety, and motives behind the decision to grant the Gloucester heirlooms outside the expected line. The statement never named her directly, but the implication was razor-sharp. This was not a plea for reconciliation, it was a protest. Then came the leak. An anonymous source released scanned pages from Lady Louise's private diary, written over the past 5 years, documenting moments of exclusion events she was not invited to, quiet reminders from aides that her role was supportive rather than central. The entries were raw and piercing. In one passage, she wrote of watching Charlotte walk through a gallery wearing jewels she believed belonged to her own line, admitting she smiled only because she felt she had no right to feel otherwise. The public devoured the words, and sympathy began to shift. James, long viewed as reserved, stepped forward with unexpected resolve. Together, he and Louise appeared at carefully chosen charity events tied to causes close to their late grandparents. Their coordinated appearances, composed demeanor, and precise media timing told a story louder than any statement. This was no longer a family dispute, it was a rivalry, and the press recognized it instantly. Headlines framed it as Wessex versus Windsor, while commentators argued over lineage, merit, and manipulation. The monarchy now walked a tightrope between a public hungry for tradition and a rising generation demanding relevance, a move that shocked insiders. James and Louise were granted a private audience with King Charles at Sandringham. What was expected to be a measured conversation reportedly ended in tears, with no resolution reached. Charles, caught between loyalty and legacy, offered empathy, but no reversal. Days later, summary notes from the meeting leaked, capturing his stark conclusion. The past is never fair, but the future demands clarity. Pressure mounted on Richard, and for the first time since the scandal erupted, he broke his silence. In a brief but blistering statement, he dismissed the backlash, writing, "Lineage is not loyalty. This family must stop rewarding silence and start recognizing strength." The words sent shockwaves through royal circles, viewed by some as a final insult, and by others as a rallying cry. What had begun as a private transfer of heirlooms had exploded into a generational war, exposing fractures even Queen Elizabeth II had struggled to contain. The monarchy was no longer debating succession alone, but its very identity, relevance, and path to redemption. The question was no longer who would inherit, but who truly deserved to. Just when the feud seemed beyond repair, an unexpected turn came from the throne itself. After weeks of silence, King Charles summoned the council and delivered a verdict that stunned the monarchy. The crown's future, he declared, would no longer be dictated solely by tradition, but by conviction. The chamber was heavy with anticipation as he took his place, his expression more strained than regal. Acknowledging the unprecedented gravity of the moment, Charles confirmed that Prince Richard had acted fully within his legal and historical rights. There would be no reversal, no royal veto. The crown, he said, must not interfere with private conviction when it aligns with purpose. Then came the words that shifted the landscape entirely. Princess Charlotte possesses a natural leadership that transcends age and expectation. We do not deny it. We will not fear it. We embrace it. Audible gasps followed. It was a coronation in everything but name. Still, Charles walked a careful line, speaking warmly of Edward's lifelong service and loyalty, while stopping short of endorsing any claim to legacy. With deliberate precision, he added, "Not all roads lead to inheritance. Some lead to support, and that too is noble." The message was unmistakable. Edward's chapter was closing, and Charlotte's was beginning. In the final moments of his address, King Charles announced a sweeping initiative to modernize the monarchy's approach to inheritance and symbolic authority. From that point forward, the distribution of royal artifacts, honors, and ceremonial roles would be evaluated through service rather than seniority, with merit guiding the path instead of birthright. The old guard stood frozen, while the younger generation smiled, sensing the shift. The monarchy, long bound by tradition, had taken a decisive step toward reinvention. What the public did not see, but insiders later confirmed, was the moment that followed. As advisors withdrew and the chamber emptied, Charlotte approached the king alone. Cameras captured only a fleeting frame, her arms wrapped tightly around her grandfather, his eyes filled with an emotion rarely seen in public. It was not a victory embrace, but a burden shared, the quiet transfer of an invisible weight, known only to those who bear the crown. The leak was brief, but it was enough to tell the world that something fundamental had shifted. The crown had spoken, and Charlotte had been chosen not by force, but by faith. In doing so, the monarchy had broken its own unspoken rules. Yet even after the king's verdict, one final twist remained: Richard's personal farewell, and a sealed message meant only for Charlotte. Long after the cameras had gone and the crowds had dispersed, she opened a velvet box to find not a jewel, but a letter. The room was quiet now, the chaos of court behind her, the judgments delivered, the anger aired, and the alliances tested. Surrounded by the heirlooms whose weight she was now expected to carry, Charlotte discovered a final envelope tucked carefully beneath the embroidered cloth, sealed with Richard's insignia, and known only to her. She broke the seal with trembling hands. The letter was handwritten, every line a farewell, a revelation, and a call to duty. "Not of blood," Richard wrote, "but of spirit. That is the measure by which you were chosen." He did not write as a duke, but as a man who had watched the crown too long, constrained by habit and silence. He spoke of private conversations with Queen Elizabeth II in gardens and libraries, where she spoke not of titles but of hope, and of how she saw in Charlotte what she feared the monarchy might lose: fire without arrogance, strength without entitlement, purpose without ambition. Then came the sentence that would remain with her forever: "Your reign may never come with a crown, but lead anyway." It was not a coronation, but a commission, a calling defined not by title, but by character. Richard had never expected her to inherit the throne. He had prepared her to stand as though she already had, knowing that the power behind the curtain often shapes more than the one upon the throne. Tears followed, not from grief, but from the overwhelming intimacy of the words. No cameras recorded that moment. No courtier interrupted. Charlotte sat in stillness, the room unchanged, yet her world transformed. She had inherited more than jewels or relics. She had been entrusted with the faith of those who once carried the crown through darkness. That responsibility now belonged to her. Quietly, without announcement, she rose. The halls of Windsor stretched before her, echoing with the footsteps of sovereigns and soldiers, of queens who ruled and those who were never permitted to. Holding the box in her arms and the letter close to her heart, she walked on in silence, no fanfare, no crown. But for the first time, the legacy she carried no longer felt like a shadow. It felt like light. Because in this monarchy, crowns may be inherited, but legacies are claimed.